Hello, Bob. Thanks very much for contacting the International Concertina Association, particularly around the World Concertina Day, our first ever World Concertina Day, as we celebrate 70 years of the ICA this year. We're really pleased to talk to you, Bob, because you firstly have some very interesting musical instruments, and you're going to show certainly one of those later on. But also you have a very unique history, family history with the concertina, and we'd really like you to tell us some of that. So, Bob, would you like to introduce yourselves to us and this unique family connection you have?
Sure. Well, I'm Robert Minting to my parents, Bob Minting to most of my friends now, and my father was Harry Minting, and he had a lot of history with the concertinas, which we're going to talk about. He obviously brought me into the concertina world as well, and I've learned to play it as a boy, and took part in several ICA concertina competitions, which I think I did pretty well in because I was the only person of that age playing the concertina at the time.
And when was this, Bob?
This is back in the 1950s.
1950s. So
okay.
when the ICA was brand new.
Possibly, I don't remember that. I was 8 or 9 at the time. I remember being pushed up on stage to play some music on the concertina and coming back with a certificate or two. But you know, that was it. And then from my own concertina playing point of view, it was then out of fashion, and I took up the guitar and played that for most of my career as a, well, I wasn't a career as a musician, but as a hobby. But then recently I have got back into playing the concertina and still remember where all the notes are, and played for a short time with the J25 band, who are based in the southwest where I live now, southwest England.
Right. And as we're speaking, Bob, I know we're going to put some pictures that you've kindly sent us, and but I think one of the first pictures we have is of the young Harry with his concertina. How old do you think he would be in this picture?
Yes, well, I guess looking at that, he's in a teenager, I guess, sort of 15 to 18. He was born in 1908. And he was one of 6 children. And although his father wasn't a musician, I don't think they were particularly well off. His father insisted that all his children learn to play a musical instrument of some sort. And Dad and one of his brothers, Albert, both chose to play the concertina. And I'm not sure whether Albert had lessons with Charles Rutterford, but certainly Dad did, Harry. And you've got the picture of Charles Rutterford coming up, haven't you, where he's playing. I don't know a lot about Charles Rutterford or how they got in touch, but it may be that they just lived in the same area of North London, and Charles was advertising himself as a concertina teacher, and that's why Dad got involved with him. Right,
but later on, your father, you also got to know Ernest, which is Charles's son. And I understand you played in a really interesting band with Ernest.
Well, there are several pictures of him in a band with Ernest, it's true. It seems to be a dance band operating just before the war, I'd have thought. And in many of the pictures, he's playing the banjo. So he'd learned that as well. But he was also a concertina player, and he seems to be sometimes lined up with another concertina player playing perhaps the baritone concertina, and he was playing the treble. But again, he was still fairly young at that stage. Well, he was 1908, so he would have been in his 20s, I guess, 28, 1930, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the picture we're showing, it says, I'm just reading it to my side, the Shakespeare and Rutherford rhythmic combination, masters of symphonic syncopation.
Yes, I think that was just the introduction to it. Yes, I don't know what it was like. I think it was a dance band, so they played at dances. And somewhere I've got a list of many of the dates on which they played, and they played a lot of dates during that time. After that, the war came along, and he took his concertina with him. He was never posted abroad. I think he was in Lincolnshire, in the Air Force, and he played at many dance bands, played with many dance bands, and for dances to entertain the troops then, as well as being in one of the forces, the Air Force. After the war, he went on to join Moss Empires, which I believe was a film company. And it was there he met my mother, who was also working there. And after that, he went to Wheatstones and took over as sales manager there. I don't know for how long. I was very young at the time. And I do remember being taken in on a Saturday morning a couple of times because he had some extra work to do, and I was not at school then, so he took me in. And I remember being in the factory, but there weren't many other people around at the time. It was a Saturday, but I do remember going to visit them there. And I didn't know at the time, but I imagine that at that time the sales of concertinas was declining, and Wheatstones were on the point of closing. So Dad was doing his utmost best to try to keep the sales of concertinas going. And he gave lessons. He wrote a correspondence course, which I've got papers of, so that people could learn from at home from the concertina. And he also seems to have set up this television program of What's My Line. I can only believe that was to try to just get the concertina shown on television. And he wasn't the person demonstrating the concertina or demonstrating making the concertina at the time, but the person who was chosen to do that was a guy called Alfred George, I think his name was. Anyway, the connection there is that I've recently met up with Sally George, who's a member of the J25 concertina group, and she well remembers her uncle, I think it is, who was on the What's My Line program. And I remember also that quite generously, Dad gave every member of the panel there a concertina to take home with them. I don't know where all those have ended up now, but whether they ever played them, but it was all a promotion exercise to try to get the concertina back into fashion.
Oh, that's fantastic.
The factory had to shut eventually. I think the sales, he was doing exports as well to South Africa, but I don't think that was sufficient to keep it going, and the sales declined and the factory shut. And he went in one day, I think one Saturday, and salvaged whatever he could, because things were being taken out and just being disposed of. So a lot of things that he was able to bring home to keep, just to preserve them. After that, he still kept playing, of course, and he played for an international folk dance group who were Russian.
Yeah, there's a splendid picture we're going to show that we found in the ICA library. In fact, it came from a collection from Reuben Shaw, who then passed on this wonderful, all these lovely pictures of your dad, but in this splendid Cossack type costume.
Yes, that's right. He had to dress up for the part. I remember going along a few times to watch what was happening. I was quite young at the time. I didn't play for them at all, but it was entertaining to watch the Russians dance and to accompany them on the concertina. Yeah.
Yeah, and another picture we've got now. I'm no expert, but it really looks to me as though this is Stanley Holloway, and potentially a production of My Fair Lady, where your father's in the front row at the back. Can you remember anything about that? I
honestly can't remember that. I know that Stanley Holloway did come into the story, but I was very young at the time, and I don't remember. I think they needed a concertina player to play in a band to accompany things, and I do remember him saying something like, Dad was never very good at playing by ear. He always liked to have some music in front of him, and that while he was playing, Stanley Holloway, who was walking about the stage, came and stood in front of his music. But he managed to keep going. That was a funny story that I do remember him telling me about Stanley Holloway.
Well, I'm a player and I need to play by music too. And you're interesting, you're telling about Ernest Rutterford. And of course, Wheatstone's published a number of Ernest Rutterford pieces of music, and I still play these to the day. And so while he was your father's friend and musical companion, it's lovely that all these Wheatstone pieces of music that were arranged by, or published by Wheatstones and arranged by Ernest Rutterford are still alive today, and we share these with ICA members from the library. But I thought that was interesting.
Yes. Well, I think you've got also a picture of me standing with the Rutterfords when I was about 3 or 4 years old in Great Missenden. They had a huge house. So Ernest must have done very well from his dance band playing. And the other thing was he seemed to be a market gardener. He had a very large garden with greenhouses in the back full of tomatoes. And I think that during the war, tomatoes must have been at a premium, and he was supplying, because I think probably he was just too old to be called up. So he didn't have to serve in the war, but he did act as a market gardener to provide tomatoes.
Right. So you were saying that sadly Wheatstone's eventually closed down. Did your father work for the company right to the very end of Wheatstone?
Yes. I think it must have been right to the very end, because he went in to clear out, or was there to try to save as much, because a lot of it was going into a tip. Music and bits of instruments, and the Symphonium that I've got was probably one of those things that he managed to salvage at the time.
Well, I know people would be really, really interested to see your Symphonium. So, Bob, could you share that with us?
Well, I can, if you can see that. It's a little box with keys on either side, just like a concertina. And the only thing different really about it is that it doesn't have bellows, but it has a mouthpiece that you blow into to operate the reeds. It has exactly the same sort of configuration of notes on the right and left hand side, although far fewer notes than the concertina would have. Mostly the natural notes, but there are, I can see 5 on that side and 4 on that side, sharps and flats. So you can play in about 5 or 6 different keys, the main G and D and E and that sort of thing. It's quite difficult to play, and I have played it recently and made a bit of a recording of one of the folk tunes that Dad had in his concertina lessons. It's difficult because it takes a lot of breath, and there's very little small hole to breathe through. So you have to breathe at the same time as playing, and that's quite difficult.
So when was the Symphonium made? Have you got an idea when they were made before the concertinas?
I don't know that.
Well, the patent was in about 1829, wasn't it? Something like that. The patent for the English concertina.
Well, maybe that's right. I really don't know that. But what does fascinate me is if this was actually made by Charles Wheatstone, he may have blown it himself, which is really fascinating. There's no date on it. I can't see a date anywhere on the piece.
And what we have in the ICA library, so is a rather tatty bit of sellotape coming off it. But you see here, we do have some music which was written for the patent Symphonium. And
Nice.
We've made a discovery this evening, haven't we, Bob? That actually what it says on this music, it was arranged and dedicated to T.F. Savory Esquire by John Parry,
yes,
as performed by him at public and private concerts. So you can see that.
Yes.
And let's have a look at your Symphonium
Yeah.
box.
So inside the box, it's a nicely lined box, but inside there, you can see that it says Parry. And when I saw it, that didn't ring any bells with me at all. But until you mentioned that there was this Parry who was involved. Yeah.
So I should be sending you a copy of Parry's music so you can keep it with your Symphonium.
I've seen something else. I've just spotted this on the other side of the box. There is the number 137.
Ah.
Now, and I can't believe that there were 137 of these Symphoniums made. I know that there's one at the Horniman's Museum in London, and possibly another one somewhere else, but I don't think there were 137 Symphoniums.
Well, I'm sure there are some concertina historians who are watching this film who can chip in and tell us how many they think were made and what was the year, because we were just getting it.
Okay.
Bob, that's really fascinating. We are going to play a clip of you performing on the Symphonium for probably the first public performance on a Symphonium for probably well above a century, who knows. Do you have? But I was saying you have a lovely English concertina too of your father.
Yes, I do. So this is this. It's got gold-plated keys and tortoiseshell ends, and actually, I believe this was once owned by Ernest Rutterford, and he gave this to Dad when he stopped playing concertina himself, and that passed down through the family to me. But my sister also has a similar concertina to this, which was Dad's. It's got Harry Minting embossed on it. So this one is numbered 30959. I know that there's some concertina records at the Horniman's Museum that you can look up to see when it was made, and that. I haven't got my sister's number with me, but she's got one as well. Both very good concertinas. I've never had it serviced or anything. It keeps playing quite well without any problems.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for telling your father's story and sharing these wonderful photographs. And it was great to actually find some photographs in the ICA archives, which I know that you'd not seen. So it's been a real pleasure to share those. And for linking up our music performed by John Parry to the very instrument that you hold has been a real delight in doing that as part of this interview today, Bob. So thanks very much. I mean, we very much appreciate your time.
There was one other photograph that I found here that we haven't mentioned this evening, but I thought it would be interesting for you. Have you heard of Boris Matusewitch?
I did. We have, yes.
Well, this is a picture of Dad and Boris standing outside Dad's music shop. So obviously Boris had come over to the UK for some reason. I guess this is in the 1960s, maybe early 70s. Boris was an American. I think he lived in New York, and when I went out to America. Sometime later, I did call in on where he lived. I think he died by then, but I called in to meet his wife or his daughter. I can't remember which. But he was a very famous concertina player, and they obviously were great chums together in that picture.
That's great. And Eric Matusewitch is a member of the ICA. So.
Oh right. So you may see that.
We are in touch with him, and we 2 or 3 years ago we did a special issue about his life and his work, and we have lots of his music in the library too. So another great player, and it's lovely to see that picture. And So thanks very much, Bob. We very much appreciate your time. And,
thank you very much as well. Thank you.
Thanks for getting in touch.